Hi there, and welcome to the Surviving and Thriving in Residency podcast. I'm Charley Lowry, your host and director of GME Relations at PracticeLink. This show is all about exploring the world of graduate and undergraduate medical education. We'll dive into the real-life experiences, successes, and challenges faced by medical students, residents, and fellows, while also highlighting valuable tools to support you, whether that's financial planning, student aid, or the many free resources provided by PracticeLink. If you're thinking about med school, currently studying, or deep into residency or fellowship, this podcast is here to offer insights and support to make your journey a bit easier than those before you. Today, we have with us David Rice, who is the Associate Director of Student Financial Services at St. Louis University. Our podcast is really hoping to help out anyone on the medical journey with questions they may have. So we hope to provide some useful information to you today. My role within PracticeLink is Director of GME Relations. So I do a lot of outreach with residents, medical students, just helping them out in finding their first career and doing some CV reviews and just helping them out the best that we can to give them information that we hope that they need and that maybe they're not getting in the education journeys. So welcome, David. I'll let you talk a little bit about you and your background and generally about what you do there at St. Louis University.
Thank you. My background, I've been doing financial aid for about a little over 30 years at this point. I've been at a few different schools. I've been here at St. Louis University for 13 years, and I've been down here at the med school for 10. I am in the student financial services area. I'm kind of the counseling and outreach person. I'm over all things people is the easiest way to say it. There's the processing side of things. And so I'm going to say the joy, and I do really mean that, the joy of working with all of our students on campus of all the areas, but I get to spend a little bit more time here with our med students. And it has been just an incredible journey. Just awesome students. Feel very fortunate just to get to work with them.
That's great. That's absolutely great to hear. All of the medical students that I've gotten to work with and all of the residents at St. Louis University are incredibly special people for sure. So I know it's a pleasure to get to work with them all the time. I only get to work with them a little bit here and there, but they've been great so far. So let's just kick it off with just talking generally about financial aid. Like what actually is financial aid for if a medical student were coming in and maybe hadn't used any type of aid in their undergrad or something like that?
Sure. Well, let's talk some of the difference. So if you did or didn't use aid at your undergrad, if you did, you were used to maybe filing the FAFSA and you had to include your parents' information on there and things like that. Maybe you got some federal state grants and some aid that came straight from the financial aid office at the university. And now you're going into a med program, which is a graduate program, which we all know that, but sometimes because it's med, we think, well, is that different? No, it's a graduate program that has some special financial aid options. So if you have not ever received aid or things, but maybe needs to start doing that for the med side of things, well, the first thing to do is just apply for admission. We forget about the admission application. Sometimes is the initial financial aid application and just applying to admission. Some schools, they may begin to push some financial aid information back to you. Here at SLU, they would direct you to an online, we have Scholarship Magic here, and that's where you would begin to apply for our internal scholarships. From a bigger picture, from a federal aid standpoint, you would need to file the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid at studentaid.gov, and then that gives you eligibility for all the federal student loan programs. Some of our students choose to stay out of the federal process and use private student loans, and we have both of those things available. And what's kind of unique for med students, if we have some students who maybe they've already been a graduate student, they know that they were able to get like $20,500 in a federal student loan as a graduate student. But med students are eligible for an extra, I'm going to keep this kind of simple, an extra couple $1,000s per month of enrollment. So most of our med students can get up to like $40,500 for fall, spring, and another $6,600 for summer. So all of that to say, not trying to get too lost in financial aid jargon, between scholarships that you receive from a university and the federal loan programs, you can generate aid to cover not just your direct costs, but also your living costs. And here at SLU, students can generate about $2,300 a month of living expenses, to kind of boil it down to really how we think about how am I going to pay my rent and those kinds of things.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's good. That's good information to know for sure. So as far as things like work study, is that an option for a medical student? Are they allowed to work off campus? How does all that work?
So let's talk work in general. But yes, if they want to be eligible for federal work study, that is a need-based piece of aid, and they would need to file the FAFSA. But yes, our med students, they're allowed to work. But generally speaking, whether it's on campus or off campus, federal work study, or just working in general, that is very difficult and probably not optimal for a med student. And so while it sounds really noble to say you're going to work your way through college, certainly work your way through med school, you are. It's going to be in the classroom and in the hospital and in the clinics. It's just very difficult to do that. And so that's where, unfortunately, probably the loans come in, the scholarships, certainly the scholarships, but some of the loans then to generate living expenses. So yes, they can. It's just not real easy.
And probably not encouraged as well, I'm
not
sure.
Encouraged, no.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about standard process of applying. What about deadlines for applications for federal aid?
A couple things. Most schools, if we kind of use February 1st as a deadline, that is a good deadline just to kind of remember for most schools. I don't know that we even have any official ones posted yet, but usually February 1st, March 1st, I would say if you can really kind of put your target on, if you're going to file your FAFSA, do that before February 1st. We'll talk about when is it going to open this year. It's going to open in December, but you'll have plenty of time. But kind of that February 1st is a good deadline to keep and remember just generally for any school. Follow the directions that you receive from your admissions office. They'll provide those exact deadlines for you. But in remembering the deadlines that med students are facing coming into school, they have to pare down to their final two schools by like April 15th, and then they have to pare down to their actual school they're going to go to by April 30th. So the deadlines are designed to be able to get information from students, review them for eligibility, and then push those scholarships back to them. From a FAFSA standpoint, from a federal aid standpoint, there's no more need-based aid or things coming off the FAFSA, so that deadline is relaxed. They could file their FAFSA much later. Let's just say school's going to start in August. You'd want to have your FAFSA filed sometime before July so that you can know that you've got the federal aid coming to disperse to give you your living expenses and those kind of things. But you technically could file your FAFSA anytime throughout the course of the year. But technically, you want to have it all done before school starts. So it's kind of two sets of deadlines, one kind of for the scholarship kinds of pieces, another for the federal student aid kind of pieces.
Okay. So if a student were applying for medical school, they should fill out the FAFSA first before filling out all their applications?
I would say they just really, at this point, they're probably in the process of applying to med school. So they're probably doing that first and then follow the directions they receive from the admissions office. Like ours sends a kind of a welcome letter, kind of points them into directions. Here's where you apply for the scholarships. It gives them all that. So really their admission application is first. From there, they'll kind of have a direction of which way to go on scholarships. So that's probably first. FAFSA is going to open up here December 1st. I always say do it early, then you got it out of the way. You don't have to worry about it. So probably admission application first, followed by the directions they give for scholarship applications, and then the FAFSA.
Gotcha. So once they receive an award letter, what all does that details their award package, I assume, and then how do they go about comparing those between different schools? I mean, I'm sure there are a good price difference for in-state students maybe versus out-of-state. What's the best way to really navigate those different packages?
There's a transparency movement going through the country on award notices so that they're more standardized, so that they're not meant to be deceptive, but there's a lot of different things. You asked a really good question at first. What is financial aid? Well, financial aid is, when we think undergraduate, it's grants and scholarships and work and loan. At the graduate level, it's kind of scholarships or sometimes assistantships or those kind of things. But those are the kind of things that we don't have to repay. They're based on merit. Usually they're things we don't have to repay. So we want to make sure when we start receiving those award notices, we understand what part of the award notices are the scholarships that we don't have to repay. It should be very clear. The second part then is if we have any work study, that should be outlined separately. And then if we have any loans, they should be outlined separately. So as you begin to receive those award notices, you want to understand the differences of the different kind of aid that you're receiving. And it should be very clear. There's literally sort of seals of approval that financial aid offices can get now from our National Association on, yes, you meet the transparency qualifications, and SLU does meet that. Our award notices now are electronic, which makes them much better because there's a way then electronically to put little hover over text where you can see it, where you don't have to fill the whole page with so much text that nobody really can read it anyway. I think our award notices used to be like 4 pages long, right? So we're just kind of hover over text so they can see it. But yes, as they begin to receive them, they just want to understand how much of this is scholarships, how much of this is a loan, how much of it is work. And also the cost should be clearly outlined on there too. Direct cost and then indirect cost, so you can understand how much you can generate for living expenses. So award notices usually start flowing February, March. It's with FAFSA not coming out till December, it's really tricky to turn all that stuff around any quicker than that. So probably March this year's probably when they'll start flowing.
Gotcha. Okay. And then there is probably still, you may know this, you may not, I don't know, as far as in-state, out-of-state tuition, that's still a huge jump, I'm sure, right?
Sure. So let's talk in-state, out-of-state tuition. So the only time in-state or out-of-state tuition comes into play is if we're talking about a state school. So private schools, doesn't matter, in-state, out-of-state. State schools matter because, well, let's face it, if you're in state and you're a resident, well, you've been paying taxes to that institution, whether you know it or not. Right. So that's why the difference in price between in-state and out-of-state. I think you see that probably more at the undergraduate level than the grad level, but still. So if you're looking at a private school, it's going to be the same price either way. If it's a state school, it could be a different price, whether you're in state or out of state. If you are an out-of-state student trying to get into a state university, you need to ask the question, how many out-of-state students do you take into your program? It's just a good question to ask. Hopefully that's as many as apply or whatever, but sometimes that answer is 0. So just ask that question of the admissions office. If it's a state school, how many out-of-state students do you take?
That's great advice, I think. So what about resources for visa holders?
Or international students?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So international students, this process can vary from school to school. It can vary widely. At St. Louis University, our international students are required to put all 4 years of cost, direct cost, in an escrow account. And that may seem harsh. So that can vary. Some schools will say, oh, put the first year in escrow or put 2 years or whatever. The problem is they don't have any federal student loan options. And until recently, they didn't really have any loan options without a U.S. cosigner. There's a few options opening up now. And so as that begins to open up, maybe it will allow us to relax some of those processes with the escrow account. But the escrow account guarantees that they have the money to finish. Otherwise, if you get halfway through, that's a mess. But that can vary quite a bit from school to school. We have some resources on our website. That's one of the links that we'll share with you. Some schools may have international schools fill out a CSS profile. That's an application put out by College Board to measure need. We're considering doing that at this point. We don't right now, but that can be for domestic or international students. So again, I think the answer there, make contact with your admission office early, follow the directions that they give you.
And then again, for those folks, for the international folks, are they eligible for any type of part-time work on campus, whether it's teaching or anything like that, or is that an option?
A lot of times they're not. It depends on sometimes the status of their visa or not. Again, either if they are or aren't. So much of that, it's just really hard to work. And like I mentioned too, until recently, there weren't really hardly any loan options for them, but there are now. We work with 3 different lenders now that have started opening up loans to international students without a U.S. cosigner. They may still need a cosigner, but it wouldn't need to be a U.S. cosigner. Those are Empower, Prodigy, and Earnest. So I know of those 3 lenders right now that are offering graduate students, of course, med qualifying, the possibility to apply for a loan without a U.S. cosigner. There's some banking regulations that when an international student leaves the country that a U.S.-based bank cannot collect, and that's why the U.S. cosigner regulation for most of them. So these other 3 lenders, they have different arrangements somehow that they're able to do that.
Physicians, are you looking for the right practice in the perfect community? We can help. Schedule a quick free call with a PracticeLink physician relations specialist today. We'll connect you with recruiters and help guide you toward the job and place of your dreams. Visit PracticeLink.com for more information.
How about residents? Can you talk a little bit about residency and how financial aid would work for a resident or what they might use it for?
When I first got down here 10 years ago, I was like, residents, are they a student still? Are they not a student? What is this? Okay, so here's the very simple answer. Residents are no longer students. So the pieces about student loans and other pieces doesn't need to get fuzzy because they're a resident. They have gone from being a student, which has a in-school deferment on loan repayment, to have graduated, and now they are simply not a student. So their loans have the 6-month grace period before they go into repayment. So they've graduated and they no longer fall under anything remotely to do with student. They're still learning, still traveling through the med process, and that's why it gets kind of fuzzy in our minds. But from a federal loan, not a student anymore, they've graduated. But there's still some really good things to talk about from the federal student loan process. Well, now we have the income-based repayment plans that students can take advantage of. So they can actually go into repayment. Let's just say average residency pay is $60,000. So if they use one of the income-based repayment plans, instead of having to pay based on how much they owe, they can pay based on how much they earn. And so, long story short, instead of paying $3,000 or $4,000 a month, they might be able to pay more like $400 a month. So if they're making 60, taking home around $3,600 a month, monthly payment on a loan would be more like $400. Okay. But those payments count if they ever in the future consider doing public service loan forgiveness. Whereas if in the old days, they just came out and, hey, had to just go into forbearance, which means they didn't have to make a payment, but then all of it's just accruing interest. They're not getting anywhere. They're losing ground on their loans. And then whenever they're done with residency, all of that would be there. Now they can use one of those income-based repayment plans. And so they're making progress. When they're through their residency and go more into their practice years and their salary goes up, they can then choose to still follow an income-based repayment plan, or they can come out and nothing truly is cheaper, even loan forgiveness, unless they're doing public service loan forgiveness. Nothing is truly cheaper than paying off early. So that in residency. So just to be real clear, not a student anymore, going into repayment, but now we're starting to work with our loan servicer more than our financial aid office, though we're certainly happy to talk. They really need to establish that relationship with their servicers. I'm going to send you a link on how do I know who my loan servicer is and what's the contact. There's some great information out there. We've got some good links we'll share with you. But that's residency. They're just beginning to travel as a non-student really for the first time probably in their whole life. Life changes quite a bit there at the end of med school. They've been an awesome student their whole life, and now, wow. According to Alice Cooper, school's out.
So now income-based repayment extends beyond residency then?
Yes, it can. Again, I think the most important thing to think is that from a financial aid, federal student loan, any kind of loan repayment, the only thing different about residency than practice from a loan standpoint is the salary is lower. But from a loan repayment standpoint, they simply stop being a student and they simply start into loan repayment. There's options to help them navigate that lower salary range well, because they borrowed to make a med salary and they aren't making that yet. So yes, those income-based repayment plans, they're not because they're a resident. It's just because they're going into loan repayment, and that's one of the options that they can choose. Probably should say a word about all of the crazy stuff in the press about the SAVE program and all of that kind of stuff is embattled in the courts. Not all of it. There's still some of the income-based programs that are going forward, but a lot of that's the SAVE program, especially that was kind of a Biden administration. It really wasn't passed through Congress. It was just a presidential piece that he put forward, and whether it's Republican or Democrat, not going there. They both do the same things, but now those things clash, especially now as we go from one being in power to the other. So there is a lot up in the air about what's going on with those programs, but they're still there. There's still options for them to use an income-based repayment plan while they navigate through residency.
Yeah, I think that's so incredible. So what about forbearance? Do you still see a lot of that or no during residency?
There's three terms to talk about when we talk about student loans. There's deferment, forbearance, and then repayment. Okay. So forbearance and deferment sometimes gets kind of tossed around as it's the same thing. Deferment is an in-school deferment. As long as you're at least half time, your loans are in deferment, they are not in repayment. Forbearance would be used more for med students while they're in school. They're not really finished yet, but maybe they need to take a leave of absence that's going to be more than 6 months and their loans are going to go into repayment, some of those kind of things. They're not quite ready to go into repayment. They don't really need to do an income-based repayment plan because let's say they have to stop out in fall or they don't do spring. They're not coming back to the next fall. So it's going to be more than that 6 months, but they're going to be back in school in fall. They would want to talk to their servicer about doing a forbearance, basically saying, for these few months, I'd like to not need to make a payment, but I'm going to be back in school. Okay. So that would be forbearance. The difference between deferment and forbearance is that deferment, the government is paying the interest on any subsidized loans they might have had from undergraduate at the graduate level. It's all unsub. But for forbearance, there's interest accruing on everything, even if it's sub or unsub. So that's that. Then the third is repayment. So forbearance really is only used to bridge a small gap in time. So that's a conversation to have with the financial aid office and eventually the servicer too. But that initial conversation would be with the financial aid office.
Gotcha. It's good information. I mean, I think this is very, very useful for anyone listening. Do you have any information on the average debt from medical school?
I do. I pulled some statistics just in general. I'll share this link with you. Just in general right now, we're at about 235 is average. Let me say this too. Any of these average debt numbers that we're talking about, that's a high enough number, right? None of the numbers you see in the press or in any of these places include any accrued interest. At the grad level, the med level, all of the loans that students are borrowing have interest accruing on them. And so you could probably add another 25% to those numbers as to what you will actually owe. And see, that's significant, right? So when we work with our med students, we actually have a calculator that says if you borrow like this, you'll owe like that. And the best we can with what interest rates are to estimate what that accrued interest will also be. So that's something for students to know because they're like, you said it was 235 and mine's 3 something. No, 235 is probably 3 something right now. Okay. So that's average. I think it's like 73% of med students borrow. And that's another thing. I think some of our med students, you said it so correctly in the beginning, they've probably had financial aid, but not loans. They probably had merit-based aid because let's face it, to get into med school, you just have to be a really good student. I always, in giving props to our med students though, some people think, oh, they're just really smart. It's easy for them. No. They are smarter than anybody on the planet, but they are working their tails off at the same time, right? But yes, they might not have had any loans from undergrad and now all of a sudden we're blowing loans up, right? And they think I'm doing something wrong. The only thing wrong to do is borrow without understanding what you need. So you need to understand my direct cost, my need for living expenses, what do I need? And if that's a need, because like we talked, it's hard to work, then I really need that. But there's a plan for it. They also don't need to be worried. I have students that come in and they'll be like, my dad said I have to come and talk to you about money, right? And so we'll have that conversation. But their feeling is, I'm completely like ruining my life. I'll have to live on bread and water my whole life. No, there's a plan. When we get to residency, we'll need to navigate that with the income-based repayment plans. When we get beyond that, we can think about what we're going to do. And I think that taking the mystery and the fear out of if I'm going to borrow, understanding before you even borrow anything, what that's going to look like in the end. And I think those are the important conversations to have.
Sure. And I'm sure there are those that probably come in with an idea of, well, I'm already this far in. A few more dollars, it's not going to hurt me. And so maybe they borrow a little too much.
The truth is, like that 235, even if it becomes 3 something, those numbers work. So just for instance, let's just do some common sense kind of numbers. Okay, so I'm going to borrow mid 200s. It's going to be more like the mid 300s or whatever with interest. So that's a $3,000 or $4,000 a month payment. Oh, what's $3,000 or $4,000 among friends, right? How am I going to pay that? Okay, so I'm going to come out of school. I'm going to make 60,000. And so they probably never even thought about, I'm going to make this much. How much do I take home, right? Well, you're going to take home, I always say to people, do your own math. Probably going to take home about 5.8% of whatever your annual salary is. That's hard to do in our head. So let's do 6%. So if I'm going to make 60, I'm going to take home about $3,600. Well, guess what? I can't pay $3,500 a month. I don't have to. I can use an income-based repayment plan. I'm going to pay about $400 a month while I'm taking home $3,600. If my practice salary later on is, let's call it $200, now I'm taking home $12,000. Now I can decide my income-based payment's going to go up, but I can afford that, right? Do I want to have to pay 3 or 4? Well, probably not. But if I borrowed what I needed, and I needed that to get through med school, and that opened up that possibility for me. But see, if I'm going to start taking home 12, then I can make that loan payment. So trying to take the mystery and the fear out of it. I'd love to be able to take the debt out of it for them too, but that's a trickier thing, right?
Any words of advice on loan forgiveness? That's a hot topic.
First of all, just a little history on loan forgiveness and why has that been such a train wreck? And we hear horror stories about no one really ever gets it, so why should we even talk about it, right? And let's put loan forgiveness in two categories. There's the loan forgiveness that the Biden administration has been putting out there, and that works great. There was a lot of that has already happened. A lot of it's hung up in the courts, but there's really two kinds of loan forgiveness aside from that. If you do an income-based repayment plan and you pay on that, that'll say something like, okay, you can pay based on your income. You make this payment for 20 or 25 years. And after that, whatever's still there is forgiven. Okay, that's cool. But you need to understand that in that arena, whatever is forgiven is taxable. Okay. And it's not because it was student loan debt. Any debt that is forgiven is taxable. Okay. The other loan forgiveness program is public service loan forgiveness. And that says, you would definitely want to use an income-based repayment then because the standard repayment on a student loan is 10 years. Well, if you make the standard payment for 10 years, guess how much is left over to forgive? 0, right? So you want to couple that with an income-based repayment plan. They're separate, but you'd couple it with that. So then after 10 years of that, whatever is left over is forgiven, but is not taxable. So public services, we'll give you some links on that too for students because there's great information out on studentaid.gov to read about that because this is hard for us to give enough detail without taking like the whole time to just talk about that. But let's talk about why people had such a hard time getting it that have come through the program. And I want to give the students that are the newer students total confidence that that's really an option. Let's think about this from this point. The government can only forgive a loan if they own it. Well, in the past, before 2010, there were two different federal student loan programs. There was the direct loan program, the government's loan program, and the FFELP program, the Federal Family Education Loan Program that included all the lenders. You'd do a loan with U.S. Bank and they'd sell it to a servicer, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? The government didn't own those loans, and the FFELP program was much bigger than the direct loan program. So the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program came about in 2007. You had to make 10 years worth of payments on that in order to get. So the first people got there in 2017. The vast majority of them didn't have the right loans, but no one told them. So they were making all the payments based on these things, and they got to the end, and then when they were told, oh, you don't have the right loan, so nothing's forgiven. Well, as of 2010, the only loans anybody can borrow are direct loans. So all of the loans now will qualify. So they don't need to worry about that, but just to kind of get that fuzziness out of there. That's why that's been such a mess. And the Biden administration did a lot to fix that program looking backward. And now it's got the train back on the tracks the right way. So if they're hearing horror stories, or that's not really going to happen. No, it is. You have to have the right loans. You have to work for a federal, state, or nonprofit organization, and you can talk to your servicer about where you work and confirm that that's the right place. So while you have the loans that qualify, you work at a place that qualify, then the payments you're making qualify. Those are the three legs of that. To do that for 120 payments, they don't have to be consecutive. So if you leave that place and go to a non-for-profit or something, come back, you could pick back up. But after 120 payments that qualify in that scenario, then you would qualify for public service loan forgiveness.
That really helps a lot. Even for me, that helps a lot, just knowing, because there was a lot of mistrust there and people saying, well, that doesn't apply to me and it didn't work for me. And so that makes sense.
So there's information for all kinds of students, not just med students.
Yeah. And then I'm sure there's also a link for them to be able to search for those loan forgiveness options.
Almost everything we're talking is at studentaid.gov. All the federal information is there, but the FAFSA is there. There are loan simulators out there. So I'm just thinking about going to med school and I might borrow this much. You can go out and say, well, how much would my payment be? And what are these repayment? They're all right there. You can do all the information on the income-based repayment plans, and they're right up at the top. It's not hard to find. And like contact information for servicers. I just went to their site, little search box, loan servicer contact information. Boom, right there. It's a site that you can navigate it pretty easy, but all that information's right there, and we'll make sure you've got that link.
Okay, that's great.
Physicians, have you finished training and now you're job hunting? PracticeLink.com's Resource Center is packed with free tools to help. From creating your CV, interview prep, and even tips to ace that site visit, we've got you all covered. Visit PracticeLink.com's Resource Center today, and while you're there, create your free account to connect with employers and view exclusive job opportunities.
So, big question of the day would be, what are the common issues that you come in contact with every day, or the most common things that maybe folks do incorrectly, or maybe simple things that people miss, or any hints and tips that you can give?
There's a lot of really good people working in financial aid, and they've given their life to it. And I always say, I don't really want financial aid written on my tombstone, but if they're going to write something, I want them to say, you talk to us about how to pay for a degree and not just a semester. And so having a plan to pay for your degree, first of all, understanding what your needs are. And I think the common mistakes are, I went out and got an apartment. I didn't think about what my resources were going to be. So for instance, like I just said, our med students here, depending on their level of scholarship, would obviously reduce the loans. But if they max out their budget, there's a term called cost of attendance. It represents the maximum amount of financial aid you can receive from a school. It includes the direct cost and then cost of living. So not getting lost in those weeds, all of that, our students can generate about $2,300 a month to live on. Well, if before they even understand that they go get an apartment that's $1,600 a month, and that's not too hard to do in urban areas, or they don't want to have a roommate, or they don't whatever, that's where it gets really tricky. Students should know that schools, we're not a bank. We are heavily regulated by how much money we can give to students. So let's say $2,300, and a student might say, well, I want more than that, and it's my life, so I should be able to borrow for more than that. Let's put that on this side of the scale. On this side of the scale, it's our life too. Because when the accreditors come to town, and they were here this year, one of the biggest things they look at is that student debt. And they hold us accountable for that. And I'm not saying you wouldn't be accredited for that, but it's one of the things they look at. And I've been through 2 accreditations here, and they look at that. So the truth is, we have to get it right. Students can't be having to live on bread and water, but we also have to have a balance of what that debt is. So the biggest thing is understanding, what's my budget going to be? How much can I have? And understanding that before you go out and make all your arrangements. We also struggle sometimes because students coming into med school, before they get here, they've either racked up a lot of debt or a lot of moving expenses or a lot of things. It isn't because we're not trying to hear them. That's not part of the academic year, and we cannot generate aid for that. Okay, so those are the biggest things. I think having a budget, understanding what your needs are, and then what the possibilities are for what that budget's going to look like. And then the mistake isn't, I borrowed too much. If you borrow what you need, then you borrowed what you needed, right? But I think it's that the financial aid office only has very limited options of how to increase that budget for specific things, like maybe a computer one time for the degree, depending from school to school, but maybe for health insurance, or if we have married families, sometimes high cost of childcare, some things like that. But it's very limited. So the biggest thing is that understanding that budget is limited, it's not unlimited, and setting your life up, your budget up, so it fits within that range.
It's got to be hard to come across couples who are going through med school at the same time, I'm sure. That's a heavy burden on their minds to have that debt as well.
It can be a blessing. I don't want to say curse, because hopefully that's a happy married couple or whatever, but the blessing can be the possibility, if the spouse can work, we can maybe borrow less. But let's face it, probably we just uprooted our life, or something. But can the spouse work? If not, it just depends. But so it's not really necessarily a good or bad thing from a money standpoint, but it could be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything else that you want to share, or any advice you want to give to any upcoming folks who maybe are considering medical school right now, or maybe even someone who's getting ready to finish up medical school? Any words of wisdom from you? So
from the beginning, you really want to make your connection with your admission office. Make sure you're getting your applications in. Follow their directions. They'll be the ones directing you to the scholarship, financial aid pieces. So that on the front end. Have a plan at the beginning of how you're paying for your degree, understanding what your resources are, those kinds of things. And I say that really for a peace of mind standpoint. If you're borrowing, just understand there's a plan at the end to help to navigate through. For those that are preparing to graduate, understanding the process that you're going to have a 6-month grace period, that you've got time in there to make connections with servicers, get your income-based repayment plans in place before payments kick in. Sometimes we have students that, because those payments are going to be lower in that earlier time, they don't want their 6-month grace period. They'd rather get started paying early. They can do that. They just need to reach out to their servicer to make those kinds of things happen. I think through that whole process, they need to know that people are here to help them, that they don't have to do that by themselves. I always say to the med students when they come in, because they're kind of humbled by this whole financial aid thing, and I say, okay, well, like, just imagine here in a few minutes, I got to go down to class with you. I'm pretty humbled now too, right? Someday, lots of people are going to need all the things that you're learning. And the other thing of it is this complexity of the financial aid process to a med student. I say, imagine someday down the road, you're sitting on the side of a bed. And in your mind, you have this vast amount of information to tell this poor person, and you've got to scale that down to what's going to meet their needs at the moment. So think about how you feel right now. You feel like, I don't understand this. So first of all, we then try to put that in terms that our med students can understand. But I think that's great training for them, for patient care down the road. This is how they're going to feel. They don't know this stuff. And so how you feel now, imagine how you'd want somebody to speak to you. And I hope that we're doing that way. But I think that's great training for them.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you both, and thanks for being on the podcast today, and we'd love to have you back on. Financial aid is something that it's not going to be talked about within an hour podcast by any means, and it's always changing, so we'd love to have you back on, but I do appreciate your time today, and thanks for all you do. St. Louis University is a very special place, and you're blessed to be there. They're blessed to have you as well.
Well, thank you very much, and happy to do this anytime.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Take care.